Members, we're considering the address in reply, and the motion is for the address in reply, and the question now before us is that the motion be agreed. I call the Honourable Robin Chapple.
Thank you, Madam Deputy President. I've sort of done it already. There you go.
We'll start again. The question is the motion be agreed. The Honourable Robin Chapple.
Thank you, Deputy President. A valedictory speech expressing farewell usually occurs after graduation. So I basically hope that after 16 years in this place, I can say I've graduated. In no particular order, I'll endeavour to reflect, address the future and provide thanks to the many, including the unsung heroes. There will be a large number of members departing this chamber on the 21st of May. Mr. Deputy President, some due to pre-selection battles, some through genuine retirement, and some as a result of the outstanding win by the ALP on the election night of the 13th of March. I also experienced in that time the pangs of being a defeated member. So to those of you leaving not of your own volition, I wish you well. For those of you leaving due to pre-selection defeats, I offer you my sympathy. Behind closed doors, politics can be a malevolent being. But to all members of this place, retiring or defeated, you all have become my colleagues over the last 20 years. I've had the privilege to work with many of you on many committees. The Honourable Nick Garan on the Voluntary Assisted Dying Committee, and others. And I think the Honourable Michael Mission, Jackie Boydell, Robin Scott, Kyle McGinn on the Pinging Committee. And we had some fun on that Pinging Committee. I think my driving skills are remembered by most of the committee, and I think the car cleaners in Kalgoorlie are pleased that I will never be using one of their hire cars ever again. I also actually made a fundamental mistake when going to Kalgoorlie. I live in the northwest. I'm used to fairly hot environment. But when I got to Kalgoorlie, they have freezing nights there. And I only had my sort of classic bush shirt on and a pair of thin trousers. And I want to thank the Honourable Jackie Boydell, who gave me this marvellous scarf, which I now treasure and is one of my pride and joys. Thank you, Jackie. It kept me safe in Kalgoorlie, and it's kept me safe ever since. So I want to also at this time talk about the various committees that I've been on. Delegated legislation, I've been on that committee from virtually the very beginning. I had one moment where I chucked a wobbly and quit the committee. And I did so because this Delegated Legislation Committee is the most benign committee that is bipartisan. It does not have a political view. And yet, a number of years ago, the two major parties started caucusing in delegated legislation. And we actually had to get the Honourable, no, here we go, name gone again. No, it wasn't, it was former president of this place. No, not Barry House. Sorry, we'll forget the name. We'll come back to that in a minute because I'll actually deal with that more shortly. But we actually had to get an old member of Parliament to come back in and read the Riot Act to delegated legislation to explain that it did not deal with politics. It just dealt with policy. Anyway, so it's been a great pleasure to be the Deputy Chairperson of that committee. George Cash, sorry, that was who I was referring to. It's been a great pleasure to be the Deputy Chairman of that committee. And of course, that committee does, whilst the Chairperson is in the Legislative Assembly, It does all its work in the Legislative Council, so that usually meant that I was forever on my feet disallowing motions. And I want to thank my colleague Martin Pritchard, who's worked very hard on that committee since I've been on there, and I think we've done pretty well in that committee in making sure that regulations, both by government and by local government, actually achieve their intended purposes. I also, as I mentioned, served on the End of Life Choices Committee, which was very passionate for me, but also quite eye-opening. I discovered things on there which, even though I was a supporter and proponent of voluntary assisted dying, I didn't even know about. I also acknowledge the many ministerial advisors that I've worked with collaboratively over the many years. And one way to get stuff done in this place is not by asking a parliamentary question or even addressing the minister, but is going to their ministerial advisor and having discussions with them. And I think I've developed quite a good few friends in that way. And even after I've left Parliament, hopefully I can still contact them from time to time. So it's been an interesting journey so far. It really is a shame to see some of the effects on the democratic process conjured up by Glenn Drury. I say this not because of any sympathies for the losses of my colleagues, but just as I see it as a bizarre aberration, nay, a manipulation of the electoral system by this vote whisperer. I don't decry the aspirations of any political organisation or individual wishing to enter the maelstrom of politics, but I'm critical of the major parties who had before them the ability to stop this gaming of voting system by this gentleman during the last term of government and failed to do so. Unfortunately for those entering the Legislative Council representing minor parties who garnered primary votes of less than 4%, your time here, because of the ALP's absolute majority, will do nothing to further your individual causes. But I do wish you well for the next 4 years. To my colleagues in this place, the Honourable Diane Evers, who I've shared a room with for the past 4 years, Alison Zamon and Tim Clifford, I wish you well in the future. It has been an immense pleasure to have worked with you all. You have been and are the champions of progressive politics. And a special shout out should also go to our parliamentary support in this place. Tonya, thank you for your seemingly tireless work. We always knew what we were doing, which was amazing. To my colleague, Brad Pettit, entering this place for the first time, I wish you well. You will be the sole representative of a party that looks to the future and not to the past. You carry a heavy burden. Jacques Cousteau often quoted the First American nation's proverb, "We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children." This should be your guiding light. You represent more than the people of South Metropolitan Region. You represent in this place the future of humanity. In reflecting on the task ahead for my colleague Brad Pettit, he literally carries the weight of the world on his shoulders. At my age, one is surrounded by repeated passing of many of my peers, friends, and we find ourselves mourning their passing. But in reflecting on this, I am concerned that humanity has failed to grasp the enormity of the challenges facing future generations. And indeed, I believe we should be more focused on mourning the future. To my colleagues that I've worked with in this place, Lynn McLaren, Diane Evers, Jim Scott, Chrissy Sharp, Dee Margetts, Giz Watson, Adele Carles, Alison Zamon and Tim Clifford, thank you for your sage words, support and dialogue. Thank you to my old friend Tom Helm, who gave me his preferences in March 2001 election, which enabled me to enter this place for the first time. And to my daughter Sarah, my then campaign manager. She had nothing better to do. In reference to the comments made by the Honourable Aaron Stonehouse in his valedictory, I want to touch on how I found out I had been elected. At that time, I was working within the Greens organisation and was doing the scrutineering at the central polling place. And we were really concerned about whether Giz would be re-elected. So I'm head down, bum up, looking at all the votes and trying to maximise Giz's vote and doing all the things scrutineers do. And a gentleman from the Electoral Commission came in to the count for North Metro and said, Mr Chapple, I think you need to come into Mining and Pasture. We're just going to, pull the lever. And I thought, oh, I'm never going to get elected, so no, I want to stay here. And I think it was Justin Hardbourne, actually, Hardbourne. And he said, no, you've got to come in. And I went, why? And so eventually I went in and Dee Margetts accompanied me. And so I'm sitting there and we go through to number 6, and number 6 is Robin Chapple gets elected. And I'm going, but I didn't want to be. I was more than happy being a backroom boy, so to speak. But anyway, I got elected and found myself in here. And at that time, I also learnt through many of the people who were in here at that time. John Cardell was one who gave me a lot of support and advice at that time. And of course, I entered in with the Fabulous Five. There was Giz Watson, there was Chrissy Sharp, Jim Scott, and Dee Margetts. So we had quite a powerhouse then. To all of you here, both members and staff, I will remember you all. Those from time to time, while I might remember you, I might not be able to put a name to a face. And I think that will be my legacy in this place, the man who could never remember who he was actually talking to by name. At this moment, I would like to acknowledge that all the presidents I've served under since John Cardell have all used their appointment to be independent and bipartisan. This clearly extends to the current president, the Honourable Kate Doust, who I count as a friend. There are also those staff members who always provide us with exemplary guidance and assistance, and they deserve my thanks. Nigel Pratt, Paul Grant, Sam Hastings, John Seal Pollard, Rebecca Burton, Grant Hitchcock, Peter Gale, Renee Jewell, Chris Hunt, Brian Conn, who doubles as a security service provider for those on the Pinjin committee, Brian Conn, Lauren Levere, Hayley Brown, the inimitable Hayley Brown, wherever you are, and also to a very, very special person, and that is Deb Kapoor, without whom afternoon tea would be a disaster. The Hansard team should also not be forgotten. They're astounding. They turn our imperfective prose into readable offerings. The Parliamentary Library team have served my office exceptionally well over the 20 years or so that I've had the pleasure of working in this place. They're phenomenal, and there is not anything they can't do for you. I want to now quickly turn to the 1989 Senate inquiry that made the point that an active citizen is someone who not only believes in the concept of democratic society, but who is willing and able to translate that belief into action. Madam President, currently young people under the age of 18 are not able to translate their belief in the concept of democracy into action as they are excluded from voting. Given that old fogies like me are making or failing to make decisions that affect their future, I find this unacceptable. Research undertaken by the Australian Council of Education Research demonstrates that young people as young as 14 have strong opinions on the performance and general characteristics of politicians. People under the age of 18 pay taxes, can marry, live independently, are assumed to fully understand and be able to comprehend their actions in the criminal justice system, can legally leave school at 15, make decisions about their health care from 16 and drive cars. Yet as a community, we don't let them vote. I find that appalling. In her 2017 speech to this place, the Governor introduced a few points on the environmental sector. And I'm not sure whether a couple of these things were missed, not by the Governor, but by the Government. in presenting the Governor with its future directions, but the Governor rightly identified Western Australia is blessed with some of the world's most beautiful and unique landscapes and biodiversity. A key priority for the government is to balance the need to provide economically sustainable growth into the future for the next generation, while ensuring that future generations will enjoy the same natural wonders as we do today. While successive governments have focused on economic sustainable growth, very little has been done to address ensuring future generations will enjoy the same natural wonders as we did then. This is my second valedictory. In 2005, when I failed to retain the mining and pastoral region seat, we placed the sign on the front door of 1074 Hay Street. The sign read, saying, "Out to lunch," back in 2009. It was a pretty long lunch, but there is no such sign this time. I'm leaving for good. As members know, I have been diagnosed with asbestosis. My hearing has diminished for the last 4 years. Quite clearly the upside of that is I can't hear interjections, which is great. And I now have 3 different pairs of glasses, so retirement was definitely the best option. Little has changed since the 29th of May 2001 when I first addressed this House. The guard has changed, but the rhetoric remains basically the same. No one seems to be prepared to tackle the future crisis confronting the globe and this state. On Thursday, the 4th of June 2009, I stated in that place that our global commitment to climate change so far had been akin to setting out in response to the Titanic collision with an iceberg to have been individually polishing each one of the Titanic's deck chairs prior to attempting to rearrange them on the deck. Well, we're still polishing those deck chairs. The only problem is that we're doing it 3.5 kilometres under the surface of the ocean. Nothing has changed. As Abraham Lincoln said, "You cannot escape the responsibility of tomorrow by evading it today." In April 2010, as part of the Legislative Council time capsule proposal, I submitted a lengthy parliamentary question to be answered when the capsule was opened. It contained 25 questions dealing with social justice, environmental issues, and only 2 social justice issues have been addressed since that time. The first was, on what date did marriage between 2 persons of the same gender receive full and equal recognition before Australian law? This occurred on the 9th of December 2017. And something very dear to my heart, on what date did voluntary euthanasia become lawful medical practice in WA? And the assent day with that was on the 19th of December 2009. Unfortunately, none of the questions addressing the environment have been achieved. Aboriginal site destruction goes on unabated. I seriously hope that the incoming members, Davina Diana, MLA, and Honourable Rosetta Sahana, MLC, will be given the opportunity to ensure that the government guarantees that the protection of Aboriginal heritage will be in the hands of Aboriginal people and does not, as proposed, reside with the ministers into the future. A situation that has continually led to unobstructed annihilation of thousands of sites in the mining provinces. I now turn to an area of my personal passion, which is the land masses of Murujuga and Pijuru, referred to as the Burrup Peninsula. The state and Murujuga Aboriginal Corporation have agreed to World Heritage nomination in this area. Yet the Burrup Site 23323, which contains over 2 million petroglyphs, many dating back 40,000 years, and is probably the most important archaeological and cultural site in Australia, was deregistered by the Aboriginal Cultural Material Committee under the former Liberal government and still has not been reinstated. Notwithstanding the World Heritage nomination, the state and industry are still pursuing industrial development on this landmass in the form of Yarra Ammonia's nitrate explosives plant and their proposed hydrogen plant, which will indirectly increase gas use by Yarra, Perdaman's new urea plant, Woodside's gargantuan Burrup hub expansion, and the Coogee Chemicals Pty Limited, Mitsubishi Corporation and Wesfarmers methanol and I always get this word wrong, monoethylene glycol petrochemical plant. As we know, rock art petroglyphs are already being impacted by acid rain, as predicted by Robert Bettenarek, the convener of the International Federation of Rock Art Organisations, way back in 2002. The pH on the rock surface is now 3.5, and that's from documents provided by Ian McLeod, whereas the washing of the rocks pre-industrialisation had a pH of 6.8. 7 is approximately neutral. So the pH on the rocks at the moment is like a good white wine. It is affecting the patina and the microorganisms that make the carvings distinctive. Murrujuga Aboriginal Corporation Chief Peter Jeffries told an inquiry into the destruction of the sacred Juukan Gorge site that the group had no commercial agreements with miners and relied on funding from industry partners. He stated, "I would also like to put on notice that I stand here today that there is a real genuine fear that there will be financial repercussions for MAC despite our responsibility to manage Burrup. Our ability to do so is increasingly linked to the internal approval process of our proponents. We have funding applications in processes that may become stalled as a result of what I am saying here today, that is, before the committee. This is a simple example of the power of mining companies built over Aboriginal corporations. Murrujuga, whilst having been my passion for many years, also provided with the awesome opportunity to meet Susan Standen, who I hold very dear. I would like to thank FARA, Friends of Australian Rock Art, who some members are in the gallery today, for their continued fight and the work that they do in this space. Lastly, I would like to thank the Greens WA for having continually allowed me to stand as their representative for the mining and pastoral region. All the people who have worked, volunteered, been interns over the last 20 years in our office. Clearly too many to mention, but I'm proud that some have gone on to work in this place, believe it or not, become staffers in the federal arena and have also become members of Parliament themselves. And lastly, to my current team. They're around, they're waving at me, that's great. Emily Peters, Lewis Downs, Betty Richards and Tiffany Homewood. You have collegially served the team so well. You have been working tirelessly over the last months to extricate us of 20 years of accumulated data, personal effects and paintings, etc., out of the office, which I will be leaving at the end of next week. I give you genuinely a deeply indebted thank you. Thank you, Madam President, and thank you for your service to this chamber.
The Honourable Robin Scott, I want to acknowledge your contribution and your passion for the issues that you've pursued vigorously over the last 20 years, and I certainly, on a personal level, wish you well for your health issues into the future, and I hope that you have a long and prosperous life, and we look forward to staying in touch.